This is a video unboxing and installation of a Tongsheng TSDZ2B torque censored mid-drive electric motor which I purchased from Bike Tricks out of Saskatoon, Canada. We'll start with the motor. It's just under 8 pounds, feels pretty solid and well built. This motor area, which hangs below the frame of the bike, is pretty small, which is nice. It comes with this additional support mount, which depending on the bicycle may not be compatible. I will be installing this to a Yuba Mundo long-tail cargo bike, so the additional support mount will not be used. The wiring harness is pretty straightforward. A couple connections for the battery, one for the display and one for the speed sensor. The connections to be made are pretty obvious since the plug orientation is different for each. This motor fits a 68 to 73 millimeter bottom bracket. One observation I've made is that it didn't come with an additional shim or spacer, so I'm interested to see if there'll be any additional play here as a result. I suspect that if this is tight enough to pull this side of the motor against the frame of the bicycle, and if this is a tight enough fit inside of the bottom bracket shell, there won't be an issue. The single chainring is 42 tooth, which also happens to be the same size as the largest chainring currently available in my existing 3-speed crankset. I'd prefer a slightly smaller chainring for a bike such as the Yuba Mundo, just simply because I want lower gearing and better hill climbing ability. High speed, top speed is less important to me on a bike like that. The chainring and the front bash guard is removable. However, I suspect this area of the motor might limit my options a little bit when it comes to selecting a smaller chainring. We'll see. Especially if I don't want to lose this bash guard. For the cranks, we're dealing with a square taper and the bolts are included. The cranks are aluminum. They are 170 millimeter in length. They are labeled for left and right side. The side is important for the thread direction for the pedals. Pedals are not included. The display included has a 3.5-inch diagonal screen. It's a center mount. Mounts the center of your handlebars, which I like. It makes for a nice, clean, comfortable cockpit. The display size is nice and large, easily visible when you're riding straight on. The unit, as I said, mounts to the center of your handlebars. Some baskets use the same mounting points, so that might be something you want to be aware of depending on your bicycle and the accessories you have selected. The unit has a single USB port, which I assume is for the programming cable, and it also has 3 additional ports underneath, which I assume is for lighting kits, since I see lighting controls are available. An additional input controller is supplied as well, which gives you the ability to make adjustments on the fly without taking your hand off the grip. Since the motor has a single chainring, I will be removing the front derailleur from my bicycle and replacing the shifter with this input controller on the left side of my handlebar. This is a speed sensor. It includes a magnet which simply attaches to a spoke. This rubber plug removes in order to access a hex nut to tighten this assembly. A couple cable ties were included for mounting, and Bike Tricks also supplied me with an extension cable since I will be installing this onto a long-tail cargo bike. An installation tool is also provided. However, additional tools will be required to remove the existing components from your bicycle, and that can vary depending on your style of bike. For my bike, I'll need a square taper style of crank puller and a Shimano bottom bracket tool. Other various size screwdrivers and Allen keys will also be required. I have this basic X-Tool starter kit I purchased from Chain Reaction online. It's a great initial investment for anybody starting to work on their own bikes. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so this is the bicycle which will be receiving the conversion. It is a Yuba Mundo. It is the V4 frame. It is currently a 3-speed front by 7-speed in the rear derailleur. So we'll be, obviously reducing that to a 1x7. So it'll be interesting to see, how well the gearing handles the motor in a 1x7 configuration. The 7-speed in the rear isn't easily upgradable because it is a free-wheel style of cassette instead of a free hub, so the options are pretty well limited without replacing that rear wheel, which I don't want to do. So we'll go with the 7-speed. And one other thing I'd like to mention about this bike is, before upgrading it to an e-bike, I'd highly recommend upgrading it to disc brakes if your bike doesn't already have it. This bike, when I first purchased it, had the V brakes on it, so rim brakes, and it scared the crap out of my wife when she was going down a steep hill with the children on it. So I promptly removed the V brakes and stuck on some hydraulic disc brakes. I originally purchased the disc brake upgrade kit. It was a mechanical disc brake upgrade kit from Yuba, which I purchased direct. I didn't like it. It was a really poor brake set, and what I'd actually discovered after I placed the order is that it was completely unnecessary. I did not need the wheels that they provided. I should have looked closer before I purchased that. The disc hubs that are on this bike already had the mounts for the rotors. So if you're considering a disc brake upgrade to this bike, take a close look at your hubs and look for the mounts for the rotors. I'll zoom in real close here, and it is this right here. It'll have bolt holes for rotor to connect to. So if you've already got that, you don't need to replace the wheels. You can buy the rotors. You've got the mounts here to mount the disc brakes, and which are the IS. I believe it's an IS mounting, and I think these are 180. Yeah, 180 degree rotors, which are plenty large enough for this bike. I'd heard stories of somebody upgrading it to 203 millimeter rotors and ended up bending up their frame because it was too much braking power, because I could totally see that happening. You got a lot of weight on this bike, and if you brake really hard, things can bend and twist. So the 180s are plenty enough. The disc brakes that I had put on it are, the entry-level Shimano, which were fine. The nice thing with the rear one is that I didn't even have to shorten it at all. The 1700 millimeter length was pretty much perfect for the rear, so I didn't have to do any cutting and bleeding at all. It was just a plug-and-play affair. So we will dive into removing that front chainring and the bottom bracket, and removing the front derailleur, and start upgrading this thing to an e-bike very shortly. Another thing I wanted to mention was the Yuba does have an E-Rad upgrade kit as well, the Bionics kits available for this bike. I chose not to go with the E-Rad. For one, it just looked like a ODM version of a Fang, which I didn't want. I live in Calgary, and the bylaws in our city specifically state that powered on-demand bicycles are not allowed on our pathways, so only pedelecs are allowed, which is the reason why I selected the Tongsheng motor through Bike Tricks, because it was strictly a pedelec. There's no throttle. It senses how much torque you put into the pedals and outputs, it amplifies that to give you the assist. So that way it's fully compliant with the bylaws here in Calgary, and we'll be able to ride this on the trails. The E-Rad kit was pretty pricey as well. The kit from Bike Tricks was quite reasonable at $13.50 starting Canadian. I elected to go one step up for the battery to try the 52 volt battery. I believe it's a 14 amp hour, and yeah, I'm really excited to see how well it's going to work on this bicycle. Okay, so first thing we'll do is remove the pedals. It's easy. Counterclockwise to loosen. It's the other side, that's the reverse. Okay, the one on the left side of the bike is the clockwise orientation to remove the pedal. So we'll take this. Okay, so on this side, we're going to remove the crank bolt. That'll just be a counterclockwise to remove. There we go. And then I'll remove the bolt on the other side the same way. Okay, so for a crank puller, I needed to take off this extra little insert since it's just a square taper. So I just, with a smaller sized, I'm just going to back that off and thread this into here. Make sure that's seated quite nicely. Catch all the threads. Tighten that one in. Alright, this could be a bit tight. So, I'm going to hold on to this side with a crescent wrench. And then I'm going to use the same tool I used to remove the pedals to tighten this down. That was actually easier than I expected it. Alright, exact same process for the other side. Just thread this in all the way, make sure all the threads are engaged. Tighten this one in until it's seated. Good. And just like that. Alright, so now we'll use this Shimano bottom bracket tool to remove this. I'm going to start from the non-drive side. This is just a little coupling that kind of holds it centered. So we'll take that one out first, it's easiest. Okay, line that up like so. And for the left side of the bicycle, it's a counterclockwise rotation to remove. That was actually really easy. Alright, so that's all it is on that one side. Set that down and move over to the other side. Okay, so for the drivetrain side, the right side of the bicycle, it's the opposite. It's a clockwise rotation to remove the bottom bracket. And it actually looks like it somehow loosened up already for me. That's unusual. Anyways, that came out easily. And that's your bottom bracket. And that we will no longer need. We'll be installing the motor there directly into the frame. I'll also be removing the front derailleur as it's no longer required. So first disconnect the cable. I'll remove this screw as well. This is a 5mm hex tool. Alright, so I'm going to need to remove this lock nut and also these screws here to get rid of this extra little plate before I can fit this into the frame. So I will remove these screws. Alright, so there's a couple spacers in behind there as well to come out. And then this just slides straight through the frame. And that's basically it in a nutshell. So we'll go over to the other side and put these other parts back on. Actually, I forgot to remove this extra support bracket, so I'm going to take that out here right now as well. This would be used if this bicycle had this area here available to put this support bracket through, but since that's not an available option, I'll just remove it. Alright, I'm going to need these spacers in here again. This bike has a 68mm bottom bracket, and I for sure need these spacers. So I'll put those, I'm just going to put them there loosely and try to line them. There you go. Those to catch threads, and then I'll do the same thing on this side. And I'll just go back and forth between the two. Nice and snug. I'm not going to fully torque these down just yet. I'm just going to loosely kind of make sure they're snug. Okay, good enough for now. Now I'm just going to put this lock nut on here. And see how well this is fitting. Pretty good. Alright, might as well start torquing it up. So go back and forth between these two screws first of all. I don't want to apply too much torque to these. Stop there, and then I'll get the special tool and we'll tighten up that nut. Alright, here's the installation tool that was provided. I'm going to use that to tighten up this lock nut. Make sure everything's good and tight. Good. Alright, so we're going to remove the front derailleur shifter as well because we won't be needing that. Actually, come to think of it, oh, bonus. We actually don't even have to remove all this stuff. This screw will come all the way out by the looks of it, and this should come right off without even having to remove the grips. Oh. Oh, it's a bit tight. And there it is. It came off. Little input controller uses a 2mm tool to remove these little hex screws. So fortunately, I can remove both of them on here, and I'll be able to install this without taking the grip off. So it's a bonus. So I'm going to position it here on this this side of the brake. One thing I forgot to mention is that if you have one of those combination style front shifter and brake, you know, sometimes they can be one unit, you're going to end up having to get a new brake handle as well. That's if you don't have hydraulic disc brakes, which I recommend you should have for a bike like this. Alright, so for the display, it's just a little 3mm hex screws to, I'm going to take these, back these all the way out and mount this on the center handlebars. The spacers came out, and I'm going to put them around. They just click in to over top of the handlebars like that, and then I'll be able to mount the display. Alright, I went ahead and tightened everything up. I think it looks good, so we'll move on to the next parts. For the speed sensor, I went ahead and installed that with a couple zip ties I had, along with the spoke magnet. So pretty basic install. I didn't bother to document the process, just went ahead and did it and show you where I stuck it. And then for the cable and extension cable, I just routed it nicely, used some cable ties and try to make it as clean as possible. Alright, so we'll go ahead and put the cranks on. I'll take this crank bolt off. And I've got the crank for the right side here. Go ahead and just line that up and thread this bolt in. Nice and tight to make sure this crank is seated all the way on there. Alright, that's on. We'll put the crank on the left side. I'm going to want to make sure I orientate it with the crank on the opposite side. Okay. Alright, good. So one thing I had run into a bit of an issue with the battery was these bottle mount holders were relatively low on the frame tube, and it made it so I couldn't mount this because they're the bottom without, with more than one screw, because this is in the way. So bottle mount holders were too low to be able to fit this. I checked this against 3 bicycles that I have, and it was the exact same problem on each of them. So I temporarily mounted the battery backwards, which worked, but I wouldn't recommend you do that because it's just, this area here, water can get in, which you don't want to happen, etc. So I reached out to Rush On, and it tells me the solution is to take off this cover and drill a hole. Simple enough. Let's break out the power tools. Alright, so I went ahead and lined it up with the bottle mount mounting points, and I figure right here is about where I wanted to drill a hole. Now I taken these screws out and tried to remove this, but this assembling is glued or silicoed in there pretty tight, so it didn't want to come out. And so I figured the best thing to do here is just to drill a hole in the top. I'll make that hole a little bit larger so I can fit the head of the screw, and then I'll continue on with a smaller hole in the bottom to just fit the threaded part of the screw so I can mount it to the bottle holder. So I'm going to be very careful going through the top here. There's a couple wires inside that I obviously don't want to cut through, so I'm just going to start drilling there nice and easily. Spinning the right way. That's the spot. Yep, just going through there easy. Whoa. Alright, make sure I didn't catch a wire in that. Doesn't look like it. Alright, so I made sure that the wire wasn't caught and it's out of the way. And I'm going to continue drilling this hole so it's a perfect size right through to the bottom. That is perfect. Okay, so now that I got the those first 2 holes cut, that hole size underneath is perfect. Now I just need to make this one large enough to fit the head of this screw through. So I'm just going to use a larger bit now and just make this top hole a bit bigger. Oh, that was quick. Alright, now that I've got my hole sizes all drilled and ready to go, I'm going to try and fish the screw up through the larger hole here and get it lined up in that smaller one. There we go. We finished the mounting of the battery. Everything's good. One thing I did do is find some different screws that were a little bit longer. I wanted to make sure to engage those threads nice and deep. And I also put some Loctite on there as well. So I want, I don't want that battery falling off. So the other thing I want to point out is that, which I didn't notice, is that when I mounted this bottom corner of the battery got a little close to there. Not enough to really be a concern, but it's just something that you might want to, take close note of before you mount, unlike me. Good luck. Installation is complete. I used a lot of cable ties to route all of the wires to try to keep it as neat and clean as possible. I brought everything down to this point here to make the connections. Used electrical tape on the the battery connection to make sure it doesn't come apart and try to protect it a little bit. One thing I think I'll do is I'll get a bicycle tube or something, wrap it around that whole area just to protect the wires and make it look a little cleaner. I took it for a quick little test run and everything is working great. It's a torquey little motor. It definitely gets this bike moving. I think what we'll do is we'll spend some time with a bike and get to know the motor a little bit. I happen to also own a Bosch Performance CX motor on a Cube mountain bike, so I think I'll be able to provide a pretty good comparison against the Bosch motor, and they're pretty similar rated in terms of torque. I think they're both around the 80 Newton meter of torque. So yeah, once I spend some more time with it, I'll do a more detailed review. Until then, thanks for watching.